Hi, everybody. Brad Truex here again from Eastman's Woodlands and Wildlife Committee. Today, we're going to do an update on coyotes. It's January 2026. Now is the breeding season for coyotes. That generally runs from January to early March. And you're actually much more likely to hear coyotes during breeding season and maybe even see one during breeding season. So that's why we're doing the update. Here's the Eastern Coyote. Is the term coyote or coyote? Well, the bottom line is both are probably acceptable terms. Out west, they are more likely to use the term coyote, whereas here in the east, we're much more likely to call them coyotes. Here's one that was captured on a game cam here at Eastman. Coyotes, the eastern coyote is one of 20 species of coyotes. And we're over here, number 20. The eastern coyote is mainly in New England and maybe also in New York and Pennsylvania. Eastern coyotes are bigger than their western counterparts. And that's because they're hybridized. They're hybridized from western coyotes and wolves in the Great Lakes region. So they tend to be bigger. They weigh between 30 and 50 pounds. So they're roughly the size of a medium sized to a large sized dog. They typically have four color phases, ranging anywhere from dark brown to a blonde or a reddish blonde. And a gray brown is actually the most common color, along with reddish ears, legs, and flanks, and a white underbelly. They typically have a drooping, bushy tail that's black tipped, and they look like a medium sized dog, but have longer, denser fur and pointed, erect ears. They're very good hunters. They have keen vision, hearing, and smell. Some say they can smell things up to 2 miles away. I'm not so sure about that, but they may be correct. And they can run up to 40 miles an hour. They can actually have sustained runs at speeds of about 20 miles an hour. They can jump up to 4 feet high and 13 feet long, and they're very good swimmers. So again, the coyotes are kind of unusual in that they are strictly monogamous. Only about 3 to 5% of mammals are truly monogamous, and of those, coyotes are one of those. They typically have one partner and mate for life. And the coyotes are very vocal during their January to March breeding season. And like I said, that's the main reason we're doing this current update because we're right in that breeding season. Both parents actually care for their young, occasionally with the assistance of an older offspring. And typically, 4 to 8 pups are born in late April or early May, but only about 2 to 3 are actually going to survive. Coyote pups are born in the dens or in hollow trees or under ledges. Some of the pups will find their own territory by the end of the first year. Others might remain with the parents and form a small pack. Coyotes live in dens. The coyote's den is usually a place where they birth and nurse the pups. And most coyote families actually have several dens. The den is dug by both parents on sandy hillsides and steep banks, typically where water can drain downward. And a den might be in a hollowed out tree stump, a rock outcrop, or an existing burrow that was made by another animal. The dens often have multiple entrances and exits, promoting fast escape. I'm not sure why they need those extra exits. The coyote really is the alpha predator here in New Hampshire and in New England. So I doubt that they have too many predators that they have to worry about. Though conceivably, the pups might be vulnerable to some larger mammals and animals. They might also occupy a den that was previously used by badgers or foxes, or they might just stay in areas that are covered by a lot of vegetation. The dens are mainly for raising the family, and coyotes usually don't sleep in their dens. Rather, they tend to sleep out in the open. The territory for the coyote ranges from 5 to 25 square miles, and it's usually shared by that mated pair and occasionally by their offspring. They like to hunt along edges, typically where two different habitat types come together. We recognize those edges as ecotones. woodlands. Now, this could be an edge between a forest and a wetland, or a forest and a meadow. So again, typically where two different habitat types come together is a favorite hunting ground for the eastern coyotes. They mark their territories with urine, just like dogs do, and also by vocalizing. But coyotes are one of the most highly adaptable mammals, and they can adapt to many different habitats, including urban areas. We'll see that some cities like Chicago and Detroit have plenty of coyotes that have taken over in various areas. Coyotes remain active year round, they don't hibernate, and you're more likely to hear them than you are to see them. Coyotes communicate by vocalizing, scent marking, and through a variety of body displays. They'll howl to locate their pups or advertise for a mate or to warn intruders to stay out of their territory. Other vocalizations include yips, barks, and growls. Okay, of those vocalizations, the coyote is often described as the most vocal of North America's mammals. In fact, the scientific name for the coyote is Canis latrans, which translates to barking dog. So it's no wonder that we're much more likely to hear them. And commonly, the coyote is known as the song dog. And eastern coyotes communicate with yips, barks, and howls. Researchers have identified 11 to 12 different vocalizations, and each one has a different meaning. Howling is not announcing a kill, but rather a way of communicating with their family or other coyotes. And most of the sounds that they make are nocturnal, but occasionally we will hear them during the day as well. They can howl any time of day, but most often at nighttime. And there you actually heard multiple coyotes. You could hear some howls, some yips, and some barks. Coyotes do scent mark for mating. And again, that mating period is right now, January to early March. And they often scent mark. And I don't know if you can see this picture, but in this picture, there's a small area of urine that's blood tinged. And that's rather typical. The female coyote goes into pre-estrus during a period that starts in mid-December. And when they urinate, it's often blood tinged. And that basically advertises to the male coyotes that the female is fertile. So if you're out hiking and you see a small area that looks like urine and there's a blood tinge in it, it's probably from a female coyote. And once again, they're often quite vocal during mating season. You've seen your dogs do this. Coyotes love scent as well as your dog does. Sometimes they'll roll over in something that has a very strong scent. This coyote is rolling over in scent left by river otters. I don't know why they do that. I hate it when my dog rolls over. My dog often finds a dead fish to roll over in. Oh, awful. So coyotes may be active during daylight, but they're mostly crepuscular. And again, that means they're most active at dusk and dawn. And they're often also active nocturnally. We're most likely to see them during mating season, which is currently. And their howls often announce their presence at nighttime. Several years ago, actually, when we first moved here to Eastman, we were out in a neighbor's yard watching a total lunar eclipse, roughly about 10 p.m. And right at the moment of totality of that lunar eclipse, the coyotes started howling. It was really a neat thing. What do coyotes eat? Well, they're omnivores. They'll basically eat almost anything. But about 90% of their diet is meat. Their typical prey are things like rabbits, hares, small mammals like mice. In the wintertime, they'll tend to eat deer. And at other times, they'll also eat berries, amphibians, grasshoppers, and maybe even small birds. The coyotes in urban and suburban areas will scavenge your garbage, and they might even eat some small pets like cats and small dogs. And they'll often hunt in pairs or even as a pack for larger animals. But keep in mind that a single coyote can actually take down an adult deer. Deer that are targeted by the coyotes are usually young or sickly, and they're more often targeted in winter when some of the smaller animals are less accessible to the coyotes. But more often than rather than killing deer, they often scavenge deer that have been killed by motor vehicles. And they usually don't prey on livestock, though they certainly have a reputation for preying on livestock. And if they do find livestock to be easy prey, they may well return. And they seldom attack humans. Coyotes are opportunists. We said before they mostly hunt on land for small mammals, but they'll eat almost anything and can be very opportunistic. Watch this coyote catching a fish.
Here, even the coyotes have become fishermen.
Unbelievable. Who would have ever thought that a coyote would be catching fish? As I mentioned before, coyotes can sometimes hunt in packs, particularly when they're after large prey like a deer. And as before, I mentioned that a single coyote can actually take down a small deer, but it's easier for a pack of coyotes to take down a deer. So see this small pack of coyotes that's crossing a beaver dam here in Heath Forest here at Eastman. Yeah, there you go. Small pack of coyotes. And again, they have very good night vision. Here's a fun fact. Coyotes and badgers often team up in a hunting partnership and they hunt together. And that's because the coyote can often hear rodents underground better than the badger can, but the badger is much better at digging them up. So quite a hunting team. Uh, Killing coyotes is unproductive. Uh, Back in 1914, the government called for culling of coyotes to protect livestock. Over 20 million coyotes were killed in the 20th century, and over 500,000 are still killed almost every year by hunters. And it may seem counterintuitive, but there's actually a real danger in hunting coyotes. And that's because killing them is actually counterproductive. The alpha female controls the reproductive activities of the whole pack. So basically, she prevents the males from mating with any of the female coyotes other than herself. And as a result, it keeps the coyote population down. But if the alpha female is killed, for instance, by a hunter, there's not going to be any protection against increased reproduction, and additional packs are actually created. A nationwide study confirmed that. They looked at coyotes, and they're most abundant in the Southwest and least abundant here in the Northeast. And coyote populations increase where hunting is allowed. Again, they're less abundant also where black bear populations are high, probably because they're competing for food with the black bears. And soft mass, things like apples and pears and plums, wild plums, are also an important resource for coyotes. Coyotes can also influence subordinate species like foxes, and that can have cascading effects on other ecosystem level processes like rodent control and disease dynamics. And that was a study that was done a couple years ago. So typically, the eastern coyote lives 6 to 8 years in the wild, and the eastern coyote has very few predators. It's basically the alpha predator here in New England. In some other places, bears like grizzly bears, Cougars or mountain lions, and wolves might be predators. But we don't have grizzly bears, cougars, or wolves here in New England. In New England, most of them would die from humans, either from hunting or motor vehicle accidents. Or they might die from infections like mange, canine distemper, or even rabies. Coyotes will generally shy away from humans, but in the last few decades, they've been more and more visible particularly in urban areas. And cities like Detroit and Chicago have had packs of coyotes, and they tend to live in empty lots and abandoned homes, which actually become a pretty good habitat for the coyotes. They can find trash, and sometimes they'll even eat small house pets like little dogs or cats. And areas with more deer also tend to attract more coyotes because, again, deer may be one of the things that they prey upon. Okay, how about coyote tracks? Well, they're typical canine tracks. And we talk about canine tracks, usually we see the claws. Now, remember, in felines, we tend not to see the claws because they have retractable claws. The negative space in canines tends to be X-shaped. So here you see a nice X shape in a dog track, and you see this X shape also in the coyote track. And once again, as compared to felines, there's only one lobe on the front of the foot pad and two lobes on the back. And if you remember in felines, you'll tend to see two lobes on the front and three lobes on the back. And again, comparing coyote tracks versus dog tracks, there tends to be more space between the toes in the coyote track. So this space tends to be bigger. I might also mention that sometimes these two toes tend to point toward each other in the coyote, whereas in most dogs, they tend to be out there. But that's kind of a minor difference. Coyote tracks tend to be a little bit more oval, and the dog tracks a little bit rounder. But the coyotes often walk on their tiptoes when they're preying or sensing danger, so the tracks might be atypical. And once again, this slide is just showing the difference between canines and felines, and we're not going to go into that now. This is showing basically the four most common canines. Here you have a large dog, here's a coyote, here's a wolf, and here's a red fox. So you can see that typical coyote print is a little bit smaller than that of a big dog, but it's much smaller than that of a wolf, and it's bigger than that of a red fox. Canines are diagonal walkers. What that means is that the front paw on one side will move at the same time as the rear paw on the opposite side. So they kind of move like this. That's a diagonal walker. And things that are diagonal walkers are typically canines, felines, and animals that have hooves. So again, here you're seeing typical pattern that you might see. So the rear foot may fall in front of the front foot when they're walking, but the speed of the walk tends to be a factor. Coyote scat is rope-like, it's tapered and kind of spongy. It's often gray colored, filled with hair and the bones of small rodents. And it's interestingly usually placed right in the middle of trails. So if you find some scat that's right in the middle of one of our trails, you ought to be thinking about coyotes. Similarly, they may deposit scat right in the middle of roads or trail road intersections. Very interesting. The location of scat often tells us a bit about who left that scat. But for coyotes, typically right in the middle of the trail. Now, unlike the gray coyote scat that we saw on the last slide, the color of the scat will depend on what their diet is. So this is also coyote scat, and it's darker, and it probably means that it had a recent kill. And that darker color is likely due to the blood or the organs of that killed animal. But you can still see the hairs that are in this scat. Now, compared to the coyote scat, red fox scat tends to be lighter and more twisted than either dog scat or coyote scat. But both fox and coyote scat will have fur and small bones in it, and they may also have berries and seeds in it, depending on what is available for them to eat. How about coyotes in winter? They're active year round. They may den in winter, but they come out to hunt rodents, and sometimes they'll hunt deer in the winter. Actually, they're more likely to hunt deer in the winter. And they're often very vocal during mating season. And once again, we're right in the middle of mating season now, January to early March. They are active year round. They don't hibernate. And though they may den in winter, they do come out to hunt. Hunting may actually be better for them in the winter. They can see their prey better, and they can often outrun them. And they will scavenge on carrion or need fruit or berries if they're available. You're actually more likely to hear them than to see them, but actually you're more likely to see them or their tracks in the snow than you are during other seasons. And coyotes communicate by vocalizing, scent marking, and through a variety of body displays. They howl to locate the pups, advertise for a mate, or to warn intruders to stay out of my territory. So again, you're much more likely to hear them vocalizing during the current season, which happens to be mating season. And again, that mating season is from January through early March. The males are actually more aggressive during mating season as well. And that's important. We'll talk later about why you should leash your dogs when you're hiking during coyote mating season. So again, they may actually flourish during winter. And in winter, their prey often is deer as opposed to the other seasons where they're much more likely to hunt rabbits and smaller mammals. The interesting thing is that in the winter, because deer have hooves, those hooves will break through crusty snow or ice. So they can't run as fast as they can other times of the year. Yet the coyotes have no trouble running at all on the snow or the crusty ice. So they're actually much more likely to be able to catch a deer in winter. And again, the coyotes can outrun them in winter, and they particularly target young or weakened deer. They also may hunt in small packs as well. I mentioned a single coyote can take down an adult deer, but much more likely a pack of coyotes will be involved in taking down a deer. Okay, coyote tracks in the snow. Again, this is showing typical canine track. You're seeing the claws, typical X pattern. The heel pad has a single lobe on the front, two lobes on the back. So typical canine pattern. And here's coyote track pattern in the snow. Remember, they're diagonal walkers that we talked about. But the pattern that they have could be a little bit different depending on their activity. So if they're actively running and pursuing prey, you might see a track pattern that's much different than this. I mentioned before that coyotes do scent mark for mating. And I think we've seen this picture before. So again, beginning in mid-December, the female coyote who's in pre-estrus, when she urinates, and you can see a little bit of urine here and then blood tinge here, the urine will be blood tinged. So that's a reliable sign if you see it in the forest that there's been a female coyote out there. And once again, they're much more vocal as well during mating season. I like this rule of thumb. This appeared in the Eco Explore website. It's the rule of thumb. And this is that if you're out in the woods and you happen to see an animal, hold out your thumb, put it between your eyes and the animal. And if you can't totally block out that animal, you're probably too close to the animal. So I really like the rule of thumb. Pretty good. So what do you do if a coyote approaches you? Well, first of all, they probably won't approach you. They tend to shy away from humans. But you're more likely to hear them than you are to actually see them. But if one should approach you, there are certain things you should do. First of all, be calm. Secondly, make yourself bigger. Stand up, wave your arms, make lots of noise, and clap your hands, blow a whistle if you have one, shout, and never run. If you run, that may make them think that you're prey. So if anything, you just back away slowly, maintaining some eye contact. And if you have any small children or pets with you, pick them up so that they're not vulnerable to a coyote, and never feed the coyotes. Okay, Mass Wildlife has a good article on what to do if you see a coyote in your yard. And here's the link to that. Basically, they're more likely to attack larger dogs during mating season. And that's because they perceive those larger dogs as intruders or competitors. So make sure that you keep your dog leashed when you're hiking during mating season. On the other hand, smaller dogs might be considered potential prey any time of year. So if you see a coyote in your yard, you should aggressively haze it by physically chasing it out of the yard, spray it with a hose, make loud noises, bang on pots and pans, blow an air horn, throw small objects like a tennis ball at them with the intent to frighten them but not to injure them. And repeated hazing will teach the coyotes that they're not welcome in your yard. You may also want to check with your neighbors and see that your neighbors aren't doing something that's attracting the coyotes. Okay, a typical coyote living in the northeastern U.S. today likely has a genetic makeup of about 60% western coyote, 30% wolf, and 10% dog. And this genetic mix actually first happened about 100 years ago, and it's still in effect today. There's also something called the coy wolf. That's a hybrid between a gray wolf and a coyote. And there, the size of the coy wolf would be intermediate between the size of a gray wolf and an eastern coyote. It's really debated whether we have any true coy wolves here in New Hampshire. And then there's something called the coy dog. Current hybrids between dogs and coyotes are very rare. They probably don't happen in nature. If anything, they might occur in captivity. And the reason for that is that, remember we mentioned before that coyotes are monogamous, so that the two mates stick together for a lifetime. Well, if a dog and a coyote mate, the dog takes off. Okay, so there's virtually no chance that they're going to have offspring that are cared for by a single coyote. So coy dogs probably don't exist in nature. This is a great photo. I don't know how they ever got this photo. This was taken in the upper Midwest. You probably remember in the upper peninsula of Michigan, there are several wolf packs. And this was a picture that was taken of a gray wolf and a coyote. It happens to be a western coyote, but you can see that the wolf is much bigger than the smaller western coyote. An eastern coyote would be slightly larger, so probably intermediate between the wolf and the western coyote. The other thing that is often mixed up with the coyote is the gray fox. So the foxes and coyotes are both canines. And particularly from a distance, it might be very difficult to distinguish a coyote from a gray fox. Coyotes tend to be bigger. They're about 44 pounds compared to about 15 pounds for a gray fox. The coyotes tend to have longer ears and bigger heads than the gray fox. And the gray fox has this black streak that goes from its back all the way down to the tail. Their tails also tend to be bushier. And one key thing is that when the animal is running, the tail of the fox tends to hang up in the air, whereas the tail of the coyote, when it's running, tends to hang down. So that's again showing a distinction between the gray fox and the coyote. Okay, the eastern coyote, again, is now the top predator in New Hampshire. And as such, it probably has some benefits to the overall ecosystem. They often get a bad rap still as nuisances to livestock. But do they do anything good? Well, yes, they do. They actually control the rodent population. And that would be both mice and rabbits. So they can protect some crops by preying on the rabbits and hares. And they may keep the mice and rat populations down, particularly in some of those urban areas that I said they have now become acclimatized to. And they also disperse seeds of a whole variety of trees and plants through their feces, and that promotes growth of some new plants. So the coyotes may have a positive impact on the ecosystem, as well as being a potential threat to things like livestock. Uh, and here's an interesting thing. This just happened last week. I was out hiking in Heath Forest. Many of you will recognize this is the Beaver Dam off the Yellow Trail in Heath Forest. And I saw this interesting series of yellow splotches in the snow. They had not been there the day prior. Here's a little blow up of those splotches. So I sat there and I tried to wonder, what are those things? Well, obviously, when you see yellow snow, the first thing you think about is urine. Well, obviously, one animal wouldn't leave that much urine. A small pack of coyotes, for instance, could do that. Another possibility, when you see yellow, kind of a yellow brownish color, may be from tannins that are leached from trees, but this was out in the open. This was not under any trees, so it's probably not that. And then kind of lastly, could they simply be footprints? You know, you probably all have experienced sometimes if you're walking on kind of slushy snow out in the woods, the places that you step sometimes take on kind of a brownish yellow color. So it could have been one of those as well. So there's several possibilities. The last possibility, since this is a beaver dam, would be, could this be castoreum? You'll recall castoreum is the kind of a creamy yellow substance that's secreted from special glands of the beaver, and it's often deposited in what we call scent mounds. But it'd be pretty unlikely for a beaver to leave so many different spots. So a little bit further down the trail, I spotted this. Okay, and this was right adjacent to the trail. Okay, now remember we said coyotes tend to scat right in the middle of a trail. This scat is twisted, and look at all the hair that's in this scat. So again, lots of it. And if you look real close, some of these other things actually look like they're probably long guard hairs. Many different mammals during the winter will grow longer hairs that are hollow, and those are called guard hairs. And they provide very good insulation. But particularly when you see guard hairs that are this long, you ought to be thinking about a deer. So the first thing I thought when I saw this is, yeah, this is probably a coyote scat. They may have had a recent deer. And the fact that this scat was fairly close to where we saw all those yellow things certainly made me suspect that the coyotes had something to do with the yellow things. So I called up John Roden, who's the keeper of our game cam that's focused on the beaver dam on the Yellow Trail. And I asked him, I said, in the last 24 hours, did you see any coyote activity on that cam? And sure enough, he confirmed this. You'll see the top one shows a coyote coming over this way, and the bottom one shows a coyote going back that way. So the puzzle of the yellow spots was largely confirmed. So that's a bit about coyotes. Again, don't be surprised if you hear them now during mating season. And in particular, if you're out hiking in the forest, make sure you keep your big sized dogs on a leash, because again, the coyotes during mating season may become aggressive toward your dog because they think they're competitors. Thanks, everybody.